talking about how to write the scope and the limitations as well as the significance of the study. So, by the way, in terms of the whole research study or writing the research study or even the research proposal itself, the scope and the limitation and of course the significance of the study is by far the easiest items to write in terms of writing the research itself. Why? Because they consist of the fewest number of words, the fewest number of paragraphs in order for you to fulfill most of them. For those of you who don't necessarily find writing as an actual hobby, this would actually be useful for you. This would actually be useful for you to determine what types of information do we need to include. See, I think that's that's the major reason as to why most people actually find it hard to develop their research projects, simply because they don't necessarily know what to write. So in this lecture, I'm gonna teach you exactly what you need to write in terms of the scope and the limitations, as well as the significance of the study. And in the process of doing so, I'm also going to teach you how to up the ante or improve the quality of the content which is inscribed in these two major parts of the research itself. So, let's go first to the scope and the limitations. The scope and the limitations actually can consist of at least two paragraphs at most, consisting of the following information. The first paragraph, of course, would consist of the coverage of the research. The coverage of the research would essentially embody the scope. It actually tackles up to what part do you actually plan to explore the discussions inside the research study. So, what aspects, what certain information you could actually provide general information as in terms of how you plan to conduct the research itself, as well as how you plan to gather the information necessary, specifically referring to data gathering. So, say for example, writing the first paragraph, you plan to write that you want to use the phenomenological type of research, or you plan to use an experimental type of research. So you could also include in the scope of the limitations the nature of the research in which you plan to conduct. So aside from the coverage, you also provide the nature of the research itself. So, after providing the nature of the research, we now go to the second paragraph, which is of course the delimitations. So the delimitations only discuss one thing. Essentially, the limits of the study, or essentially what we would like to call the boundary. The boundary in which, until what part is the discussion limited to discussing. Say for example, you want to clarify that you will not be able to suffice the general interpretations of whatnot, or otherwise you would actually express that your research interpretations is only limited to a certain number of respondents, to a certain contextual population of respondents that you actually chose. This is actually possible if you plan to publish a research that only makes use of at least 10 in comparison to a general number of populations. So in terms of defining the research limits, you could also use the number of respondents. That's one thing. And another thing is that in terms of the limits, in the process of writing such, you could already provide yourself with the orientation for the research gaps. By this part, you're already aware of which specific limits or what limits does your study have. What limits or what certain boundaries does your study have? And of course, in the process of doing so, you're already going to write the research gaps itself. So, essentially, that's what you need to write in the scope and the limitations. So it's up to you whether you want to divide the following items into respective paragraphs. Let's say, for example, one paragraph for the coverage of the research, one paragraph for the nature of the research, and one paragraph for the limits of the study. Or, you also have the option to combine the coverage and the nature of the research into one to represent your scope. And as for the delimitations, you could always use the limits of the study. So, that's one context in terms of how to write the scope and the limitations. By doing so, we don't necessarily put any unnecessary information that does not need to appear in the scope and the limitations itself. Because what I always notice in terms of newbie writers or novice writers is that they actually find it hard to think of types of information. They don't necessarily know what to actually put in certain parts of the research, particularly the scope and the limitations, since it is by far the simplest, and therefore most researchers have this tendency to underestimate the necessity of the scope and the limitations. So therefore, they have this tendency to write anything out that comes out of their mind. May it be incomprehensible or whatnot, does not necessarily matter to them. So the purpose of lecturing by the content structure is to actually teach you what you actually need to write in order for you to refrain from writing in order for you to refrain yourself from actually writing unnecessary information that may distract the research from the discussion that it actually supposes. So, now lastly, let's go to the significance of the study. In terms of writing the significance of the study, we always refer to the direct beneficiaries of the study. So, most of you already know, or most of you are actually used to writing the significance of the study as saying like, to the teachers, to the student, to the school administrator, to the parents itself. So, my criticism for that is that it's too conventional for it to appear as a high school written research paper. Why? Because it does not necessarily go astray or does not necessarily pose any improvements in the writing structure in terms of the content, which is by far already learned in the junior high school level. So, since we are already at the topmost level in writing the research study, of course we need to inculcate advanced types of data itself in order for us to have the distinction that we are indeed practicing in a higher form of learning. So, with that being said, I'd like to highlight the idea of the beneficiaries in terms of relating the research to society. We have to find ways to relate the research to society in terms of who will directly benefit from it. Say for example, if you were to write a quantitative research and you plan to, let's say for example, I'm going to use one of the best proposals that I have read from most of my students, the health-based effects of silicon to the construction workers' health. So, by doing so, in that quantitative study, we already expect that writing the need for doing so, or finding the need for doing so, is immediately responsive to those of the construction workers who make use of silica-based products. So, essentially, we need to go beyond the student, the teacher, the parent, the school administrator. No, we need to go beyond that. We need to learn how to relate the study to those who are actually outside the classroom, to those who are actually belonging to the society, to those who actually belong to the community. So, by doing so, we actually practice the idea or the essence of the research as socially relevant, and therefore practicing the very nature of the research for it to be solutions-based. We always need to be solutions-based when writing the research, and by doing so, we actually outperform we actually outperform the conventional practice of doing the research. We actually outperform ourselves as researchers when we start relating the results of research to that of the needs of society itself. So, ultimately, as per my academic opinion in terms of writing the scope and delimitations and the significance of the study, it would only take you at least a total of 5 paragraphs at most for writing these two all together. So or rather, if you want me to refer that into the number of words, averagely 1,000 words is already enough. 500 to 1,000 words is already enough for you to write the scope and the limitations and the significance of the study. So therefore, given that we already have given that we already have an expectation in terms of writing the following structures, therefore we are going to find it way easier to write the research study itself, because for one thing, we already know what to write and to what extent do we actually need to write. So hopefully this lecture has been helpful for all of you, and if you think that this lecture has indeed been helpful for you, please do not hesitate to share this video for those who you think might need it, and ultimately do not forget to leave a like on this video, and of course subscribe for my upcoming videos. So that being said, thank you very much for participating in this online lecture, and thank you. Stay safe and sanitary.